Laura, welcome to Deep Dive, our 33rd monthly online seminar. We are First Things First Okanagan. We like to present different perspectives on climate solutions for our own community and also for the world. We live on the traditional and unceded territory of the Okanagan Seal people, and we're very grateful to live on this beautiful land. And right now, in late September, we are very grateful for the environmental work that's been taken on by the Okanagan Nation Alliance. This time of year, I think people in the interior were familiar with watching a kokanee salmon spawning in our rivers and lake edges. But here in the Penticton area, we're welcoming a run of endangered Chinook salmon coming up the Columbia River, a 1,000-kilometer journey from the mouth of the Columbia River I guess, Portland. Long ways, one of the longest salmon runs in North America. And we now are anticipating a very large run of ETT, the sockeye salmon. And this is due in large part to the salmon habitat restoration that's been taken on by the Okanagan Nation Alliance. This weekend, the Salmon Feast honors the sacredness of the river at Okanagan Falls. And it's an opportunity for everyone to share in celebrating the return of the salmon. Okanagan Falls Provincial Park is a culturally significant site where there was once a waterfall, which was a traditional fishing camp of the Seal. It was a gathering place, a trading place, and for the past 10 years or so, the Seal have a salmon feast, a 3-day event. There's canoes, paddling, and on Sunday, there's a salmon feast to honor the salmon and titi, and also to honor the sacredness of river waters. So the feast reminds us of the importance of habitat protection and rehabilitation, not only of local ecosystems, but of the watershed. And it renews the connection between us as humans being here, the residents of the region, with the river and the fish. So to the Seal, it's vitally important to honor the salmon so they'll always come back to feed the people. So we honor the renewal of that tradition amongst the Seal. I'd like to pass things over to Sue now to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Margaret, and hello, everybody. Nice to be back and into the deep dives again. So transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our province. And the best climate solutions are, of course, to walk, cycle, or use public transit. However, it's not always feasible to get around without a car, especially in rural areas, which make up most of BC. So the next best solution is to drive vehicles that don't emit carbon. And to this end, both the federal and provincial government are taking steps to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles. Our guest speaker, Michael Stanyer, will talk about some of these actions, including what grants are currently available, as well as a number of other topics. And I won't talk too long so that we can have plenty of time for questions and that after his presentation. Michael works on communications, social media channels, and events at Plug-in BC. He manages the provincial Emotive campaign to raise awareness of zero-emission vehicles and provide hands-on demonstrations in communities throughout BC. He lives in Courtenay on Vancouver Island and travels throughout BC and Alberta to demonstrate EV usage. And I will turn it over to you now, Michael, so you can bring up your presentation and take over. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm just gonna bring up my presentation here. Yeah, I do live in Courtenay in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island in the traditional territory of the Comox, Puntlich, and Iksen nations. Spent most of my life in Prince George, the lands of the Kletley-Tenay. Did a brief couple years in Vancouver, but so now I live on Vancouver Island and spend a lot of time in vehicles during event season, driving all across the province in various demo vehicles, rental vehicles, car share vehicles, all electric. Lori and I identified just a few topics that I can cover here, and I think about 20 minutes we've got. So gonna go through these really fast. I have sort of a 2 to 3 hour presentation that I also do, and if you want to have me back in a few months to cover off any of these other things, then or any topics in greater depth, then I'm happy to do that. But we'll talk about power production and the grid, battery technologies and the environment, then switch over to used EVs, and then just a little bit about charging stations. Okay, so starting off with EVs and the grid. And when people talk about the grid, it's sort of usually an ill-defined concept. But some of the concerns are, where do we get power from, and is there enough power to charge electric vehicles? So just kind of some high-level stuff. Utilities, being mostly BC Hydro and FortisBC, for us are required to meet demand. They have to do it, and they make long-term plans in order to do so. There's been some news lately about BC becoming a net importer of power due to droughts. This doesn't mean that we're importing more power than we're generating. It just means that we're importing more power than we are exporting out to, say, Alberta or the States. And part of that is that Alberta allows us to buy as much power as we want from them, from their wind and solar, but they restrict what we can sell to them. But regardless, we still generate the vast majority of our power in BC. And then when we talk about infrastructure, infrastructure is constantly being upgraded all the time. Even out here on Vancouver Island, new cables being laid from the mainland to the island, new transmission lines being upgraded and that sort of thing. So people often say our grid can't handle all this extra power, but our grid is constantly being updated. And some other stuff that was in the news recently, very, very recently, this week, BC Hydro had a call for power to source additional generation specifically from renewable power projects from third parties. And they received triple the amount of generation proposals than they had really planned for. So lots and lots of potential to bring in more solar and wind projects and maybe some geothermal. And in addition to that, there's broad efforts underway to make better use of the interchange between provinces and between the states, because now lots of renewables are coming online in Alberta to some extent, but also California, just exporting tons and tons of basically free solar power when it's not in high demand. And then one more thing really related to electric vehicles is static battery storage, or EV V2X, being vehicle to building or vehicle to grid, making use of the batteries in vehicles, can be used to flatten peak demand, to deal with high energy usage scenarios. And those are already implemented in high-powered charging stations that I use regularly. At the neighborhood and home level, neighborhood infrastructure is gradually being upgraded by utility companies. They keep a close eye on how much power a neighborhood needs, and will eventually go in and upgrade things. And then at the home level, you can even get rebates now on these little sort of power switching devices, smart devices, so that if you've got a 20 or 30 amp plug that you're using for a dryer, for example, you can also have one of these smart switches that you can also plug an EV charger into that, and they'll prioritize one over the other. Like when the dryer comes on, it'll shut off the power to the charging station and then resupply power. So that saves you from having to get a service upgrade in a home, if you need another 20 or 30 amps to run a charging station. And then, MERB, multi-unit residential parking for I guess, condo buildings, apartment buildings, and this also applies to workplaces in order to kind of reduce the amount of new service being brought into those buildings. There's more sophisticated systems where, in this example, you've got 4 cars that are on the same circuit and they're all charging at 20 amps. The system recognizes when 2 of those cars are full and the others get 40 amps to charge them up more. These are quite common in those much more complicated projects for condos and apartment buildings. And this was just some other fun news that came out last week. This is at a Porsche factory where Porsche has collected up, thousands and thousands of battery modules from their test cars. So stuff that's involved in, their validation for the vehicles and their crash testing and all that. They build these big static energy storage units using those recycled batteries, and then they use that to power their plant operations and save up their excess solar power and that kind of thing. Batteries are very, very reusable and then eventually recyclable. And I had some specific requests in advance to talk about EV battery chemistries. So just at a very high level, what we've seen in virtually all electric vehicles up to just a couple of years ago was they all had lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. These are high performance batteries, but they're expensive. But they're also very well established. This is stuff that the industry knew how to make. This is Sony Handycam and laptop battery kind of technology. More recently, a lot of automakers are switching to lithium iron phosphate. So these just use lithium and iron. They get rid of the nickel, the manganese, the cobalt. That means that they're somewhat lower performance, but they're also very new and they're really developing quite rapidly to be almost just as good as the NMC batteries. But they are less expensive and they're way more durable. Being durable meaning that they can be recharged more. They can be they operate better in cold weather and heat, and they can be punctured completely without catching fire. Like ram a piece of rebar through one, and they don't catch fire. And they're really gaining popularity because of all those points. And in a lot of vehicles that are the standard range model, like Tesla Model 3 standard range, Ford Mustang Mach-E standard range, they're all using these lithium iron phosphate batteries now, or LFP. So those are two pieces of terminology that you'll see if you're shopping for electric vehicles. And then there's some brand new stuff. One being sodium. So sodium gets rid of the lithium in the batteries. On the periodic table of the elements, sodium is right there underneath lithium, and it's super readily available. People will sort of colloquially call these salt batteries, and they're not, for the most part, they're not really just salt batteries. They're sodium batteries, but there are projects run in some universities where they literally use food grade table salt to build the batteries. They're far less expensive. They're very, very new. There's just some initial factories in China that are making a couple models using sodium batteries. And then solid state batteries, they exist in small electronics. They're really high performance, really energy dense. So if they can be commercialized for electric vehicles, they'll be much smaller battery packs with way more energy. They're kind of this thing that always seems to be, 5 years away, but it's definitely, a thing that, or a technology that a lot of automakers are super interested in, and consumers look forward to as well. So that's just touching briefly on some battery chemistries, and it's kind of a segue into some of our more sustainability and environmental topics. And people often wonder about the amount of mining necessary for all the things that we need to kind of transition to a clean energy economy. This is a little graphic from Michael Thomas, who's a reporter who runs the website Distilled. He does a lot of these really good infographics based on much more sort of denser and drier reports. But in order to kind of limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius through all the solar panels and wind turbines that we need to build and all the electric vehicle batteries and all the charging components, we're looking about 28 million tons of mining materials per year. And we currently use 15 billion tons of fossil fuels per year. So you can, there's this line that runs from the top of the slide to the bottom of the slide. That is the full comparison of what 15 billion tons looks like versus right up here at the top, this tiny little sliver that is 28 million tons of mining materials. So yes, it does take a lot of mining materials to build all of the things that we want to build, but it's laughably small compared to the 15 billion tons of fossil fuels that we use each year right now. Another way of talking about electric vehicles, manufacturing, and emissions. This is some stuff they've put together regarding driving an electric vehicle in BC, and taking some kind of worst case scenario manufacturing emissions. So the blue bars for each of these vehicles are the manufacturing emissions. And I'm comparing a Tesla Model Y, which is the #1 selling vehicle in the world last year, to the RAV4, which is the #1 selling vehicle in Canada last year. So Tesla Model Y takes more emissions to manufacture. This is just because of the electricity used in the manufacturing process. You get that into the BC grid, and the red bars represent driving these vehicles and the emissions associated with driving them. And again, the electric vehicle just hardly produces any carbon dioxide once it's actually on the road. That's driving 150,000 kilometers. If we say take that on a longer timeline, 250,000 kilometers, you'll see that you can be manufacturing multiple Tesla Model Ys with the emissions that would go into just driving a gas vehicle. One more slide here as we segue into a discussion of used vehicles. If you were to say buy a used electric vehicle and compare it to some other gas vehicles in my neighborhood, I've done a bit of a comparison here. In order to get to that 10,000 kilograms of CO2, there's a red box that's tailpipe emissions. The black box is full fuel emissions, so entire supply chain emissions. Say the Honda Element there would be 29,000 kilometers versus, if you drive that Model Y in the BC energy mix, you'd have to drive for 3,797,000 kilometers to produce that same amount of CO2. So that's why there's so much policy around electric vehicles in transportation. So a little bit of segue into used electric vehicles, and this is a very exciting time for used electric vehicles. The initial leases on a lot of popular models have ended, making them available as used cars. And meanwhile, the price of new electric vehicles is being pushed down, and that has an effect on the used market as well. In addition, the incentives or the rebates on those used vehicles kind of get baked into the expectations of the used prices. And then one more thing is that used EVs are PST exempt in BC. So if you're buying from a dealership, you're still going to pay GST when you take it to ICBC and register it. If you're buying from an individual, then you don't pay any tax at all. And that's just how ICBC collects tax on used vehicles. If it's from an individual sale, it's all considered PST, so you wouldn't pay any tax. And there's even dedicated used electric vehicle dealerships in BC. Notable one is Motorized EVs on Vancouver Island here. And then there's Factor E, which is in Vancouver. And there's several traditional dealerships. For example, there's a Honda dealership and a Nissan dealership that are really, really into just all used electric vehicles. And there's a guidebook for used EVs on evfriendly.ca, which is separate from the work I do, but they've put together kind of a guide for buying used EVs. And I'm just going to share a few little pieces of advice about used electric vehicles. You can still get a lot of them with a substantial warranty left because virtually all electric vehicles have an 8-year or 160,000 kilometer warranty on the battery and the motor. And some of, especially the Chevrolet Bolt and the Hyundai Kona EV, had recalls on the batteries. So they'll have much newer batteries and refreshed warranties on them. It's nice if you can find someone who can give you a battery report or a battery evaluation on the car. And it's important to check if it comes with its basic charging cable. Some EVs, especially Fords, come with an upgraded charging cable that's 30 amp that would plug into like a RV outlet or a welding plug so that you don't have to buy a level 2 charging station. A lot of EVs have specialized tires, so you'd want to make sure that it has that equivalent tire on it still. And also tire repair kits. A lot of just new cars in general have a tire repair kit instead of a spare tire, and they're expensive to replace. And then it's important to know if your local dealerships can do service, or if local shops can do service on the vehicles too. Battery replacements are super, super rare outside of warranties. Some of the really early EVs didn't have thermal battery management systems, but all of the new ones do, and these batteries generally last a long time, probably more than the serviceable life of the vehicle. And so the big point here is that auto technicians do have access to EV service courses. BCIT, Camosun College, College of New Caledonia, and I think that program may have expanded to some other colleges as well. So there are independent EV shops throughout the college and more technicians being trained to work on electric vehicles independently of dealerships. And I want to leave time for discussion, so I'm going to skip a little bit of the charging infrastructure stuff. A little bit of the vehicle stats there. Just getting into the variety of electric vehicles, and important thing to know, some vehicles charge really, really fast. Some of the older ones charge slowly. So the things that you'll hear from people about their charging experience will be quite mixed at this stage. There's really useful tools out there. This one is called a Better Route Planner that simulates trips and tells you where to stop. It can be used as a helpful shopping tool. For example, driving Vancouver to Calgary, the Chevrolet Bolt, which is one of what we now consider to be a slower charging vehicle, would be about 3.5 hours of charging time at a few different stops. The Tesla Model 3 long range or the Kia EV6 long range would be 50 minutes or 44 minutes respectively to do that almost 1,000-kilometer trip. You can also just use the infotainment and navigation to plan out trips in electric vehicles. So if you're getting a car share or a rental one, be sure to just put your destination into the vehicle's infotainment. And just some stats. BC's Electric Highway Project is completing the end of this month. This is full highway coverage to the Yukon, to Alberta, to the Central Coast, like out to Bella Coola. BC has over 370 public fast charging sites, over 700 individual plugs, and these are just fast chargers. And then that's in addition to over 65 Tesla supercharger sites and another 700 plus supercharger stations. And then, over 4,000 level 2 stations, and Tesla does have some of their own, Tesla only level 2 stations. I think at this point, it's been about 20 minutes. So how about we just go to some discussion? Happy to entertain any questions that the group has.
I noticed that there's no questions in the chat. Usually we encourage that. Because of that, maybe we should just entertain people. If you want to turn off your
Oh,
screen,
right, sure.
Michael, and we'll just have people perhaps go on to gallery view and entertain some questions. And while people are thinking about them, I'll just ask a question myself to start things off.
Sure.
I'm in the market very actively, starting to look at EVs. And when you talk, so you try to encourage us to think about used as a, practical thing if we don't want to buy new. Is there a limit? Like, should I be looking at things that are 8 years old, or is it better in terms of the battery and also the newer innovations to be, say, only looking at, say, around 2 or 3 years old? What's your advice on how old to go for a used vehicle? In other words, price versus innovation of batteries. And
yeah, I think it varies a lot by brand. Because Tesla was in the game so long, like a 6-year-old Tesla, or one of the original Model 3s in 2018. That's still going to be a really good vehicle. A Chevrolet, a Bolt, or a Hyundai Kona EV from that same vintage is not really equivalent in terms of how fast it charges, even though the ranges are the same. So it really does come down to a lot of, if you're going to be road tripping a lot, you want to find a model that fast charges quite well. And the other piece of that is when those vehicles came out, like the Bolt and the Kona, and I'm kind of picking on them, though I've done road trips in them and really enjoy them. But when they came out, the fastest available public charging stations, that they could use, non-Tesla stuff, were 50 kilowatt stations. So they didn't have to have, these really fast charging speeds. But now we have, a lot of the new BC Hydro stations that you'll find throughout the province are 180 kilowatts or at least 100 kilowatts. And then, there's other providers like Chevron has their on the run stations. Those are 150 kilowatts. So you get a lot more value. It makes a tremendous difference, getting a vehicle that can charge a little bit faster. And that's where you, if you can find great deals on something like the Mustang Mach-E or one of the newer Hyundai or Kia products, just for example, they're getting into that higher charging range. And then all of the Tesla vehicles charge quite fast as well. But if you aren't going to be doing a lot of road tripping, then you can really kind of disregard that if you're not too sensitive to that kind of use. And you can start finding stuff well below $20,000 that's used Nissan Leafs, some of those Bolts and Konas. Yeah.
that's great. Avril has her hand up. Go ahead, Avril.
Thanks very much, Margaret. And thanks so much for your presentation, Michael. I am very fascinated by EVs, but here's my dilemma. I really, 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 really like the car I currently have. And so my question to you is, are you familiar with transition technologies that will bring a gas vehicle in to become electric? Is it feasible, and is it done in British Columbia at all? And is that sort of action possible for rebates?
So there's no rebate program for that, and there's definitely shops in BC that do it. It's usually reserved for really specialty vehicles or collector vehicles. It's quite an expensive conversion, and it is I guess, kind of low value in that you're not going to get a very good electric vehicle at the end of it compared to just buying a purpose-built electric vehicle. So, I mean, I have this whole kind of fantasy garage of conversion vehicles to do, but yeah, they're just not that effective in terms of what you get out of it. Like, it's not going to charge as fast as just buying something that was purpose built or have as much range, or kind of all the great software stuff as something that was purpose built. You know, there are shops that do it though.
Thanks. And I'll just mention two related questions that are in the chat, and then we'll go to Jim Beattie, the next person with their hand up. One person is asking about the cost of a set of batteries for a Tesla Model Y. And another person is looking at a $12,000 Fiat 500e, and the dealership told them to get a new battery, it would be like $71,000. So I don't know how that, or a remanufactured battery for 24,000. So there, are you kind of advising against the older models that would require battery replacement, or tell us your thoughts on that?
I mean, here's the thing with these, you know, battery rebuilds and stuff. If someone is familiar with the market and knows how to do it and knows how to source the parts, it can be way cheaper. There's a shop in Vancouver. They're called Factor E-Motors, and they're a Tesla specific shop, but it's a good example. They purposely buy vehicles that need to have the batteries rebuilt. You know, like a Tesla Model 3 or Model S. They refurbish the battery, sell the whole car for about $20,000 to $25,000 with what is essentially a new battery. In the case of someone maybe looking for a Fiat 500e battery, like that vehicle isn't produced anymore, and it wasn't even available in Canada. So, I mean, a new one, I don't even know where they would have a new battery stored. But yeah, it's important to seek out the shops, and usually they're independent shops that know how to get used batteries. Replacing an EV battery is a pretty straightforward process. Jack the vehicle up, take out a bunch of bolts, it drops out as one big piece, plug a new one in, and, you know, refill the coolant and stuff. It's not a lot of work. It's just a matter of sourcing the parts. And, you know, for example, Volkswagen, the ID4, their newer SUV battery, in the parts catalog, that battery is about $15,000, you know, brand new. So these claims that, you know, a new battery for something else just seems really, really out of line. But if you go to a dealership and say, you know, I want a Ford Lightning pickup battery, they might have something in their parts catalog that's going to be basically a get out of here price, because they don't want to sell it to people for their home energy storage projects or their DIY projects and stuff. And all these things are under warranty. So yeah, there's going to be some people that quote a really high battery price, but in a lot of cases, there's independent shops that can find batteries at more appropriate prices.
Thanks, Michael. It sounds like the Fiat 500e maybe just isn't the right car to be looking at.
The 500e, like it was imported into Canada. Yeah, parts are going to be a bit of a struggle for that one, though they are very compelling, fun little cars.
We have Jim Beattie waiting to ask a question. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, thanks, Margaret. Michael, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. We have a Kona, Hyundai Kona, and we've had it for 3.5 years, I guess. We have about 70,000 kilometers on it. We've made a number of trips to Prince George and a number of trips to Vancouver. Yeah, we like the distance. We do all our charging on a 15 amp charger. at home. And because we live in Naramata, we spend most of our miles are accumulated going back and forth to town. So that hasn't been a problem for us at all. With regards to the travel, yes, it is a vehicle that only takes a 50 kilowatt charge. And so one thing we noticed when there was only 50 kilowatt chargers was that many of them didn't operate up to that amount. There were times when we only were getting charges of maybe 25 or 30. It depended on the charging stations. But the question I had for you about the charging stations that are higher, like up in the 100 and 150, now that the government has changed the regulations with regards to the purchase of power, despite the fact that it takes a longer time for us to charge, are we paying the same amount as a car that can take a faster charge?
So if you're buying, if the charging station is selling you power based on kilowatts and not time, there's no really like imbalance there.
Okay.
But the thing to watch out for is you'll go to some sites, say like Electrify Canada. There's Electrify Canada stations in
Hope.
I think Kelowna, Hope, Hope, for example. They'll have a 350 kilowatt charger, a 150, and a 50. So the 50 kilowatt charger is going to be cheaper. And then the 350 kilowatt charger, I was just there. I think 350 kilowatt charger is 70 cents per kilowatt hour. And then the 50 kilowatt charger is going to be maybe around 30 or 40 cents. So that reflects the demand charges. It's like buying premium gas versus regular gas.
Okay.
So that's the thing to watch out for. If you know your vehicle can't make use of those higher powered stations, then try not to use them, because you will pay more for that sort of demand charge that's built into the pricing.
So even though they've taken away the per minute charge, or at least changed it just to the power you consume, they're still charging more for it. So you still have to be cautious.
Yeah, it's and just think of it as like the different grades of gasoline. Like if your car doesn't take premium gas, don't buy it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I should also mention, I do a lot of travel with a lot of different vehicles, and sometimes I'm not looking for the fastest charge. And so, I just did a trip with a Hyundai Ioniq 6, which is a really fast charging vehicle. But if I don't need to do it in 15 minutes, if I have half an hour, then I'll use a sort of mid-grade charging station instead and save a bit of money.
There's a question in chat. Henry Seelman is, I think, fairly typical of people who live here rurally in the interior, where I think there's been quite an interest in quite a few people buying plug-in EVs. And Henry is wondering, do you see a future for plug-in hybrids? Or might they become redundant as EVs become more affordable and offer increasing range? Could you comment on that?
Sure, yeah. Well, the important thing with the plug-in hybrids is they're really for the person who's commuting quite predictably up to usually around 50 kilometers a day maximum, and has the opportunity to charge it at home or at work every day. And that's usually the person who's trying to get that, because they're using it as a vehicle that's not going to go very far. It has the gas backup if they need it, but it's mostly being used for that kind of sub 50 kilometer commute, and it's very effective at doing that. And they're typically less expensive. But I guess I'll say that I know a number of people who started out that way, and then they'll typically just move on to like a fully battery electric vehicle when they get the opportunity, because they just like driving fully electric. And if they can get into something in their price range that's 400 kilometers instead of 50 kilometers, and they can do everything electric, then they'll go for it. But yeah, it's a great kind of gateway into driving electric, but it's really important that you can charge it every day at home or at work.
Thank you. Somebody is asking a question about subsidies. We know that there's provincial and federal subsidies, and they're a little bit different, and a little bit different caps. Could you maybe go into that briefly?
Yeah, so there's some different kind of thresholds for different classifications of vehicles as to what's eligible and how much it gets at both the federal and the provincial level. So really, for identifying a specific vehicle, it's best to just go to the NRCan or the provincial CleanBC Go Electric websites to see what you'll get on those vehicles. But the federal one includes more vehicles, so virtually everything that you'll get gets the federal $5,000 rebate. The provincial one is, and that's just a point of purchase rebate. You don't have to apply or anything like that. The provincial one was changed, maybe it was last year, so that you do apply in advance and it's income weighted. So if you make too much money, you don't really get a rebate. And then once you apply and you're approved, you have kind of a ticket or a voucher that you use when you buy the vehicle. The province has kind of lowered the threshold of the vehicles that are included. So basically they have to be under $50,000 now to be included in the provincial program. That's the MSRP. If you're adding a hitch and a factory bike rack and roof racks and all that stuff, it's fine. Just the MSRP of the vehicle itself has to be under $50,000. So I think you're muted there.
Thank you. Jim is asking whether his slow charging battery might be retrofitted to become a fast charging battery.
Oh, I know there are various kind of like very niche companies that have offered that for some vehicles. And Jim had the Kona EV. I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone doing that. There's a lot of things in the vehicle that have to be replaced to achieve that. Not just the battery, but then I mean electronics throughout the car. I guess no. What I was thinking of is the old Leafs that would get just a larger battery, but it wouldn't change how they charge. So I'm going to say probably not likely.
All right, thank you. Someone, Cheryl, is asking whether there's any concern with EV repairs. If an EV is in an accident, Cheryl has heard that ICBC has stopped giving discounts to EV owners because of the high cost of EV repairs. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, this is something that I'm really hoping will be sorted out kind of with the way that insurance has, I guess, been conducted in this regard, where there's been some just bizarre stories where a vehicle will have very minor damage, nothing involving the battery, and will get written off because a local dealership says we're not going to do it, or it's going to cost $120,000 or just something ridiculous like that. And then later on, the OEM, this was a Hyundai problem last year. Hyundai will catch wind of this later and say no, just we should have been contacted regarding this. That's, I guess, just something that I hope ICBC will maybe take a bit more action on, or that the dealerships will be a little bit more aware of with their service departments. And it's not just in BC necessarily. I've seen situations where a vehicle gets in an accident, the emergency responders who know how to deal with an EV accident unplug the emergency release cable so that the battery doesn't hurt anybody. And then a auto body shop will get it, and they don't know that cable has been unplugged. They don't even know to look for that, and the vehicle gets written off because a cable had to be plugged back in. I guess that's unfortunate kind of learning curve, but we have a lot more training programs now so that even auto body shops can become certified to deal with EVs. Say if it might require that owners are a bit more proactive, coordinating between a dealership or a shop or the OEM representative on these situations. But yeah, it totally does happen, and I've been on kind of focus groups with ICBC about that as well, and also just the sheer cost of the way vehicles are built right now. And I'm going on a tangent here, but just things like if a door on any vehicle gets damaged now, that door has cameras and sensors and heaters and very expensive speakers and stuff. So you do see some automakers saying, we're not putting things indoors anymore. We're putting all the speakers in the dash and this sort of thing to try and alleviate these insurance concerns.
That's good. Kathy Gibson from Kelowna is wondering if you've heard of hemp as a possible type of battery or use for future batteries. Have you heard of this?
Oh, sorry, what's that?
She's wondering if hemp is a possible type of battery for the future.
There's lots of stuff that batteries can be made out of. I've seen experimental wood batteries and basically anything that you can think of. I haven't really seen hemp at scale. Some of these materials too are probably better for static battery storage, where you have these enormous battery modules that are used just for kind of grid energy in general. But when it comes to electric vehicles, it's all about what is sort of reasonable in terms of cost, but also really high energy density so that they can become more and more lightweight.
Somebody, you mentioned the newer lithium iron phosphate batteries as coming into the new models. Is there any problem with charging stations with these new LFP batteries?
Nothing that I'm aware of, because they're all just made to be compatible with existing charging infrastructure. When you connect an electric vehicle to a charging station, there's a lot of communication and constant communication that goes on between the vehicle and the charging station as they kind of like lay out a plan for the charging session. Second by second, the vehicle is checking all of its temperature sensors in the battery, that sort of thing, trying to charge as fast as it can and safely as possible. The lithium iron phosphate batteries are better at being charged up to 100% more often. So maybe as like a long-term trend, you'd see the vehicles allowing the battery to be charged at a higher rate to a fuller battery capacity, because it's quite standard for most batteries to throttle off fast charging once they get to about 80% in order to protect the battery. So maybe what we'd see them charging at a higher rate further into the session.
Well, Michael, it's been a wonderful talk, and we've had some really great questions too that have allowed us to explore the subject more. I don't see any more hands raised or questions in the chat, so I'd like to just thank you again and pass things over to Sue to conclude the evening.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was fantastic. Just a couple of things that are coming up. It's actually quite a busy month coming up. Tomorrow we have a global climate strike in Penticton. I think Lori has a poster about it. And then on October 1st, we're having another action, Seniors for Climate, starting at noon and going to the City Hall. We'll be doing, a group will be doing an actual presentation to City Council, who happens to will be in session that day. October 8th, first things first, is hosting a candidates debate on environment and climate leading up to the election, and that will be at the Seniors Center in Penticton. Lori will be including links to all these events in a follow-up email that you'll be receiving in a few days that will also have a recording of this session in it. October 19th, of course, everyone's going to get out and vote. And our next deep dive will be October 24th. And we have someone coming in who has done deep home retrofits, and they'll be talking about their experience with that. So that'll be quite interesting. I don't think we have anything else, unless Lori or Margaret, I've missed something. So we'll just wish you all a good evening and hope to see you again next month. And thanks again, Michael. That was just great.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.